Hello, beautifuls. This is an overview of the centers in the human design system. So before we get into them, let me just explain for a moment that these human design centers are a powerhouse of information, of understanding how beings can work in their various and deeply varied way of being and existing and showing up in the world. When I look at a human design chart, I imagine that all of the lines that you see in a chart are like pipes, right? They're pipes and they're tunnels and they are pathways through which energy moves. I look at the top and the bottom of the system, the root center and this head center, as being pressure centers, where there's a pressure, a pump, pushing energy through here and pushing energy through here. When I think about them in the form of like how water would move through pressurized systems, where there is like pounds per square inch or a PSI pressure that is moving through the systems. And then I think about each of the centers as being storehouses where particular kinds of energy are happening in those particular centers, and then they're pushing and sharing their energy towards the next system or towards the next center. So let's dive into this a little bit. This is just an overview. So we're going to be, in subsequent videos, I'll be talking about each one of them in their open modality, their defined modality, as well as how centers are in relationship with each other versus defined and then undefined, and how they might interact. But today, this is just an overview of the centers as a whole. And we're going to start down here at the root center, the very lowest center that is on the body graph chart. So the root has three basic things that I associate with it. It is responsible for the drive that we have as humanity. Drive to do, drive to succeed, the drive to the drive that we pick up from other people, the drive that we have in ourself, right? It is the push. It doesn't talk about the whys, it doesn't really talk about the hows. It's more about the push, okay? It's also a pressure center, so that makes sense, right? It is under pressure. The root is also a motor center, and as a motor center, how it can feel in the body is a pulse, like a pulse of energy where you have the pressure to do something and then it pulses out, and then all of a sudden the energy drops and your drive is complete for the day or for that particular period of time, right? So the next center we're going to talk about is the sacral center. That's the second one up from the bottom. And that is the life force energy. So that is the seat of your steam engine, right? As long as you're putting coal in it and you're making sure it's working well, as in it gets enough rest, it gets the nourishment it needs, it gets the connection that it craves, then it hums along in a really consistent fashion. It's kind of like the subtle heartbeat in the background, right? Not the heartbeat that has to continue all the time. It knows when it's starting and when it's stopping and when it's moving energy through. It is also another motor. And as a motor, that one is more of one that hums, right? Even in their sleep, generators, and so if you have a sacral defined center, you are automatically a generator. Whether that's manifesting or pure, that depends on other factors in your chart. But as that sacral authority generator, that motor hums along, and it can even be humming along in its sleep, right? So it's more of a matter of using your energy through the day so that you have a pleasant exhaustion about you, so that when you go to sleep, you can sleep well, right? And even in your sleeping, there may be a perpetual energy movement that might show up in dreams or in how your body moves in your sleep, right? The sacral is also one of those aspects of your sexuality, your sensuality. It is that sort of warm, fuzzy, enveloping energy that you experience when you're around people. Don't necessarily confuse a sacral energy with someone necessarily being attracted to you. That might just be how they are, right? They are sort of a yummy, juicy energy. And that it gets exuded out of their very being because that is a consistent energy for them. The sacral center is also, kind of has almost a motheringness about it, right? It likes to tend and to take care and to maintain, and it works with that connection of the sexuality and sensuality, but it's not, when it's in the mothering place of things, it's more that it just deeply cares, right? It is a caring kind of energy. The sacral is also an authority center. It's the second authority center in the hierarchy of authorities, and is responsible for what makes a generator, and what makes manifestors and projectors what they are, meaning it's undefined for all of them, including reflectors. All right, so the next center we're going to be talking about is the emotional solar plexus. And so that's this one right here. It is, as you're looking at the chart, it is on the right-hand side. That emotional solar plexus is responsible for our emotions. It's where we deeply experience the feeling of emotions in our bodies, not the analysis of emotions in our mind, but rather that flux and that movement of them through our being, okay? It is also another motor. As a motor, that one has waves, right? So they rise and they fall, and so don't the emotions in the body, right? Those emotions can move from kind of like a hope, despair, ecstasy, bliss, joy, excitement to low places, sadness, melancholy, grief, unknowns, right? And so they kind of move back and forth as a wave between each one of those kinds of emotions. The emotional center is also an authority. It is the number one authority system, meaning if you have the emotions defined in your chart, or anybody has it defined in their chart, they are automatically an emotional authority. Now, that's not quite as yummy as it might sound, because it comes with it as a strategy of making sure that you wait for clarity before you make decisions. That does not mean that you're an emotional authority, so everything you feel, you should go out and do something about it. You need to, you feel the feels, and you wait to feel the feels in their highest and their lowest. And that might take you a couple hours. That might take you a day, 2 days, a week, a month. Like, it takes a bit of time for your body to move through that process of how it's going to feel if you are emotionally defined. Folks who are not emotionally defined, they experience life in a slightly different way. Their emotions can be much more intense when they do feel them. When they're not in a place of their deep emotions, they're kind of like riding that neutral wave. They're very grounded in their emotions. They're not really experiencing the high highs and the low lows. And it's mostly because they've come to an understanding in themselves when they are following their design, when they're working with how they are designed to be as an experiment. Remember, this is nobody telling you how you have to be. Our emotions are very sacred things. That's something between us and the Creator, not something that you have to follow along because someone just told you how you should feel, or maybe you should feel less, or maybe you should feel more. Like, that's none of anybody's business except for you and your Creator, you and who you work with as far as something higher than yourself. If you're working with the experimentation of human design and you see yourself as emotionally undefined authority, then you are emotional undefined center, then play with the idea that emotions don't hold a deep value for you on a consistent basis. On a consistent basis. If you are undefined in the emotions, when emotions come up, they are lessons for you where you can dig for your gold and get out, and understand that it takes a little bit of time to shake off that emotional feeling in your body, and you have to step away from whatever you were invested or involved in that created the emotions. Oftentimes those emotions are not going to even be yours. As an open emotional center, that's an amplification aspect of things, and so we amplify the things that we are around. If you're emotionally defined, then you're there to have your feelings on the subject, and you have to wait out your wave to find the clarity that is going to come for you that lets you make the decision. And even in that decision-making process, there's never 100% certainty with the emotional defined way of being. I'd say that part of that is because the body still remembers what it was like to be in the low part of the wave of that decision, and your body doesn't necessarily forget how it feels. And so in that remembrance, there might be also a bit of uncertainty. And so if you're hitting that 75-80% mark, then you're pretty clear. Okay, got it. I feel pretty certain in this. And again, that waiting for clarity is really important with that emotional center. All right, so that's the emotional center. And now we're going to move to the will center. The will center is this little triangle right up here, right up from the emotional center, kind of hangs in the middle of the chart system. The will center is also called the ego center. It's also called the heart. And it is there and responsible for how we show up in the world, as far as what we make promises for, what we make commitments to, what we say, I am going to do this, or I am interested in that, I'm going to. It's a movement forward, and it's a very intense center. As a motor, it's also another motor. As a motor, it has more of a, what I would call a glow energy to it, right? When they are, when defined will centers are on a go about something, and they have put their time and their energy into saying, I am going to do this, there is a glow about them as almost in like an unstoppable force. Okay, and the more people can identify that in themselves, the more they can be aware of that energy. Let's see. It's also another authority center. It is number 4 in the hierarchy of centers, of authority centers. Okay, then we have the spleen. The spleen is the center on the far left of the chart as you're looking at it. And the spleen is responsible for the survival of the being. It is also a center that houses a lot of the fears in the body, the deep fears, like fear of dying, fear of being in pain, fear of the unknown, fear of, okay, so there's each one of those gates in that spleen center has a particular fear that's associated with it. So learning to listen to the center's information comes with a deep intuition of really considering in oneself, what is the splenic messages that spleen is offering if it is defined for you. So the splenic messages are more like a no, stop, duck, move, you know, like it gives you, it's a soft voice. It's not like me speaking this right now and shouting this at you to let you know what that means. It's more of a soft, deep intuition, almost like if you were a cat and every pore of your skin had little hairs on it, and all of a sudden it goes, danger, danger. But that's all it does, is it's a soft little voice, and it speaks once, and it speaks in the moment. It's not like you can say, oh, how do I feel about taking a trip 2 weeks from now? It's not going to say anything. It is in the moment. So you might be getting 2 weeks later, you might be getting ready to go on that trip, and then there's this something that comes up, and you're like, okay, I need to make sure I check the oil on my car before I go on my trip, and check my tire pressures, make sure I fill up on my gas, and check a few things, because your awareness center maybe showed you an imagery or gave you a sense that something was going to break down along the way. And so then you make a choice to do something that helps to prevent that. If it is defined for you, that can show up in your world in a very consistent way. If it is undefined for you, then all those sorts of things can be happening all the time, but they might not be for you. Okay, so really lean into what are things that are defined for you, and know that those things are going to show up in a consistent way. At the end of this overview, we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to be open versus defined. All right? Open and undefined is the same thing, and defined is its own thing. Defined is when it's colored in. When it's a white center, that's when it is open or undefined. The spleen is also an awareness center, and my apologies, so is the emotional solar plexus. So the emotional solar plexus, the spleen, and the Anjana, all 3 of those are awareness centers that our body picks up and goes, oh, hang on a minute, it's telling me something, right? And it's in 3 very different ways. The spleen is around survival, and it is more of a no center, right? Where the sacral is more of a yes center, that humming along, and the sacral yeses, sacral doesn't really give a no, it just has a non-yes, where the spleen has a wait sort of sense to it when it is speaking up. It's also another authority center, and it's an authority center that's number 3 in the hierarchy of centers. Okay, that's it for the spleen, and then we have the G center. So G center is smack dab in the middle of the chart. It's the diamond or the square that's on its edge. And the G center is about the direction in your life. It's about love and connection, and it's your inner compass. Okay? It's also an authority center in the ranking of number 5. So it is one of the lower based authority systems in that hierarchical way. Some of my second years, we've talked through a little bit about noticing the different awareness centers we have in our body graph, and being just a little bit more aware of the diversity of voices that we might hear in our being, and learn to listen to them in a certain order. And so I'm not going to get into too much depth now, because if you're just watching this and you're just starting your human design journey, that's a little bit too deep, I would say, for analysis. It brings the understanding of the human design system too much into the head and not so much in the body. If you find that to be helpful, go ahead and listen through to the different hierarchical orders of those authorities and listen to them in the order that you have them defined as. Okay? How you have them defined, and then move through and listen to them, and just be contemplative with it. Be really loose with your analysis so that you can learn to start to identify them in your day-to-day actions, and how you speak, on what you think about, how you make choices through your day. And you can start to find ways where you could subtly shift things here and there where you get a better result. And that's really what I find human design to be so valuable with, is that when I feel like I'm stuck, it can show me something that I might do a little differently, that I might get a little different result with. It also gives me a language. I love human design and Gene Keys for its ability to give me language for differentiation, being able to determine what is the difference between different things. What is the difference between my emotions and my thoughts? What is the difference between my fears and my awareness? What is the difference between the different kinds of pressure we can feel in any given day? Why do we feel so different around certain kinds of people and not around others? And why do we feel so different when we are alone versus when we are around others? So all sorts of yummy things to dive into with the centers in human design. Okay, so that was the G center. The throat. So the throat is this one right up here, right below the two head centers, okay? The throat center is the center for communication. All energy in the chart moves towards the throat. Even if it has a lot of undefined centers through it, through the body graph, all energy is trying to move through that throat, through that voice. Voice is how we communicate with each other. Voice is how we get connected, and we find the connections that bring us back into the unity that we came from. Where we're at now, we are studying our separation, right? We're studying how we are unique. How am I unique? How are you unique? How is this person different from me, different from you? All of those different variables. When we're working with the throat center, when we are in communion with each other, we are bringing together the things that are different and the same. And so through sharing, sometimes it can even be a telepathic communication, right? It doesn't necessarily have to come through this vocal cord in words. It can come through in sounds. It can come through in music. It can come through whatever is an expression that is something that can be heard, is one of those ways that we bridge the separation between us, and we come back into oneness, right? And so that's why there's such a deep exploration these days around language. How can we use it? Where is the language of inclusion? Julie Woods works with that one. Sangoma works with the language between the humans and the spirit, right? So these are all folks you can go look up on YouTube and Facebook, and they do wonderful deep dives into voice and what is the power of using our voice and using our language. Right? So here in human design, that throat center is a release valve for all of the other energies to move through. How we use the voice is very powerful. Listening and not using our voice is just as powerful as it is to be speaking. 2 ears, 1 mouth. If we listen twice as often as we speak, we're going to be in a good ratio. We've got these appendages right on our body. It's an easy reminder if we make sure that we listen to it. That voice, it has a lot of pressure behind it because of all of the other pressure centers, right? The top, the head and the root is pushing this energy through the body graph and trying to make it come out the throat. So when you have those moments of I don't know what to say, or my words get weird, or people tell me I talk too much, or nobody ever listens to me, all of those things are voice related. Voice is how we get attention. It's how we get seen. It's how we get heard, right? All of those pieces are so deeply important. All right, so that's the throat center. Next, we're going to move to the Anjana, which is the second from the top center. It's the sort of upside down triangle. So the Anjana Center is the one that is responsible for analysis and processing, compartmentalization and organization within the mind. Okay, so this is where both of these centers, the head being up here, the Anjana being down here, right? We look at the body graph, we see the same thing. Okay, so when I'm pointing to this region of my body, I'm more talking about that Anjana Center. And that Anjana Center is it's how you take data or take information, things like the results of questions and answers, like the information that comes from questions and answers and inspirations and ideas, and begins to put it like to a spreadsheet, or it begins to lay it out in a pictorial kind of form. This would be an Anjana sort of physical example. Looking at human design charts and analyzing human design charts, in a sense, is a very Anjana type of energy. And so that Anjana, the reason why they separate the two head energies into two separate ones is the energy of, and here we'll switch, I'm going to switch and talk about the head as well so we can talk about them together. The head center is inspirations, ideas, questions, and answers. That's the short and the sweet of it. Okay, so the Anjana Center processes and analyzes all the questions and the answers and the inspirations and ideas and tries to put it into a workable format so that the rest of the energy body systems can do something with it. And so when you have the Anjana connected to the voice, then that is an ability to talk about organizational systems, talk about how we're going to create a classification so we can have a deeper conversation, right? That head and that Anjana often work very well together in helping to disseminate information in a logical and organized sort of way. A couple differences between the Anjana and the head is that the Anjana is also an awareness center. So in that being an awareness center, its analysis and processing, it often looks at the rest of the body, listens to what's going on, and is like, oh, you sound tired. When's the last time you took a nap? Oh, your body's hungry. When's the last time you ate? So it's almost like the logical computer who keeps track of you. And it can also be keeping track of other people. It can be a thing that keeps score, that judges, that is hyper analytical or hypercritical. So be aware of where those thoughts come from, that there is really if you look at them as a separation between two different, if the mind, all the stuff that it's churning out, if part of it is more head related, inspirations, ideas, questions, and answers, and part of it is more analysis, processing, compartmentalizing, organizing information, assessing things, those are all, and the separation between the two of them really helps you to see where your energy is being most spent. And then you take that to your human design chart and you analyze yourself in that way. The head center, as we talked about earlier, is a pressure center, and that's the one thing that makes it different from the Anjana. The Anjana is awareness center, and the head center is a pressure center. And so this pressure center up here, the very top center of the head, this is a pressure center of ideas attempting to penetrate. It's the pressure to understand the question. It's a pressure to know the answer. It's a pressure to be able to verify information. It is a pressure to do something, and it always has to do with the mind. Now remember, in all of human design, the mind is never the authority that you make decisions based on its ramblings. You do not make decisions based on that. If I could encourage you guys to take away one practice from this whole process, it's to really look at that the mental side of things and really understand that it is like a computer. And a computer is not living in your flesh and blood and spirit body. And so you need to engage the body with what is going on. Otherwise, you're going to be making decisions purely from your head. And it's not a wise thing to do. And so if you're finding yourself in a hard time with things and you find yourself to be a very mental sort of person, as in your mind goes on about things, it has doubts, it has questions, there's even a gate up in the head that is the shadow of psychosis, right? So it's that the crazy ramblings that the mind can do. That doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means that you've got stuff going on. And if you can learn to listen to it in a different way, then you can perceive yourself in a different way. Okay, so that's the end of the centers as an overview. Now I want to talk for a moment about what it means to be defined or undefined in a particular center. Okay, so back to that analogy where all of those gates and channels that move between all of the different centers, all of these different lines that move through, right? In that analogy where these are all pipes that connect to these different centers, okay? When you are defined in a center, it means you have a very specific way of being here to be, right? You have a way of being that you are here to be, and that way you can look at it as it's defined as in the gates that are being defined, that are connected and lit up for you. That defined way of being is going to have a consistency to it. You can learn to use it when you need to tap into it. So long as you are rested well, you are fed well, you have all of your basic needs met, your cup is full, right? Then you can do something with that defined energy that you have in those centers. When you have that defined energy, you're not necessarily very easily influenced by others when you have leaned into it. Okay, so here's where we start talking a little bit about the not self. The not self originated in more of the Buddhist philosophy where they talk about attachment. When you start to let go of attachments to certain ways of being, we begin to decondition ourselves from how we were raised, whether that was in a family network, friends, connections, society, politics, religion, all of it. So much out there as far as the current narrative goes is a bit bunk, right? I like to look at it as though there's truth, a little bit of truth, and a little bit of bullshit in everything. And that keeps my mind nice and wide open. It keeps me open to feel into what is going on, into everything, right? So if I look at a little bit of truth and a little bit of bullshit, then I'm not getting carried away thinking that this is the only way to perceive something. Because our conditioning can mold us in such a way that we could look at a human design chart and be like, that's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. And if a person is in that place, well, they are either in that place or they want something different. And if they're in a place of wanting something different, then what I invite people to do is to lean on the parts where they are defined and say, okay, how can I make this show up more readily in my world? How can I put my weight on this and make decisions based on what I, as an energy being, am being invited to do on a consistent basis? And to begin to step out of working with those open centers that are in the person's chart because they are not a consistency for you. So here's the summed up short difference between defined and undefined. Undefined is where your lessons and your wisdoms are. Defined is where your consistencies are. And I would call those your lanes, your roles. It is your highway that is a beautifully paved area. All you got to do is get in your car and go driving down that road, and you're going to encounter something that you are, that you're here to do, and you're here to do in a good way. The undefined centers, let's talk about them just for a minute. They are where there is an open amplification that is going on. That person in those particular undefined centers is not here to experience life in any particularly consistent sort of way. Now, you can look at the gates that are defined in that particular center, and you might get a flavor for how that center is showing up. If it is a completely open center, that's also another thing entirely. If it has no gates defined in it, then it literally like sits back like a child of innocence and just kind of goes, ooh, what's going on? If it's in its healthy state, it just has a deep curiosity about what's going on. If it is in a deeply conditioned state, has a lot of not self attachments in there, it can be a deep place of holding on to a lot of wounds. It can be a very painful thing to consider. And so the more something is deeply raw and painful for you, do understand that there might be some deep conditioning in there that where you have truths and beliefs that you have determined this is the way it is, and so everything else in your perception of reality is based on those beliefs. And if those beliefs are wrong in some way, as in life taught you to be a certain way, let's say for example you grew up in an uneasy household, and every time someone was upset, they walked around and sighed and stomped around, but they didn't really talk. They didn't communicate with you. And so you learn that when someone does that, something's about to happen or someone's not happy, but no one's really talking about it. And so you learn to be small in that process. And that small you is not the real you. It's just what you learned to become so you could survive, right? In trying to deal with that kind of deconditioning process, you have to reverse it. You have to understand that you became that way to survive. Have gratitude for the you that you were when you were in pain, that did what it could to still survive. Love yourself for it. Move back through. Find the belief that made you be small. Look at that belief and go, is this serving me? If it is not serving you, find a different belief that does. Typically, that's a belief that is going to make you be more solid in your being. Right? Life shouldn't be a matter of what other people think of us. We are here to deeply be who we are, not to be in a way where everybody around us likes us, because then all we are is a chameleon, and we're not here as us. We're here as these little carved, shaped clay dolls so that everybody else will like us. That is not how we're meant to be. We are beautifully and unique in all of our varied ways of being. And we need to put our weight into that and start to deeply work with our shadows. So our shadows are the places where we see ourselves or others in a distorted way. A lot of those live in the open centers. You can also have them in the defined centers. It's a little less common to see because that is a consistent way for the being, and it can absolutely happen. So when you're going through and you're like, okay, I'm ready to do this dive. I'm wanting to look for the things that if I can just tweak them a little bit, or if I can understand them differently, or if I can have a different belief around it, it'll help the rest of my being to be more integrated in this process and be more present in life and be willing to like fill up this skin bag that I'm in and be willing to be of service to the world, right? This isn't just about us. This isn't just about how I get to feel or what I get out of the world. It's about what is going to make me a good, solid being. And absolutely that means being happy. That means, looking at my right to be able to be in a good place. And that right gives me permission to take good care of myself. It's not a right that we get to demand of others. That isn't our right. Rights and responsibilities, those are a whole different conversation. I'd much rather talk about what is our responsibility than what is our right. Now, a lot of this world, especially in this modern day and age, rights are a really big thing. And that's because people have stomped all over others, and others have laid down and let them, and others have had no choice but to get stomped all over. So there's a huge mixed bag going on, and all we can each do is look at ourselves and see, what can I shift? What can I change? How can I be a part of this growth process? All right, that feels good for today. Lots of love, beautifuls. See you next time. My name is Rainey Ford. I'm an herbalist and inner cartographer, founder of Nematon and Mountain Woman Medicine. If you are interested in purchasing herbal medicines or discovering your inner mapping, please visit my website in the description below. Have a wonderful day, beautifuls.